Hi, everybody, and welcome to this evening's broadcast from the New Haven Symphony, coming to you actually from San Francisco, California, and Brooklyn, New York. Now, the time that this airs, I would have ordinarily expected to walk out on stage at Woolsey Hall for a concert of Joan Tower, Felix Mendelssohn, and Johannes Brahms. For obvious reasons, that is not happening. And while I'm extremely sad and disappointed not to have the pleasure of making music in front of you all live, I am at least somewhat consoled in the fact that I'm able to bring to you, as part of this evening's segment, a chat and then a mini recital by the person that would have been the soloist in the Mendelssohn Concerto tonight, Alexi Kenney. He's very kindly agreed to join us from his place in Brooklyn and to talk with me for a while. And then he's also prepared a segment of music to share with us. And so I'm so grateful to him for joining us this evening. So hi, Alexi, how are you doing?
Hi, Alistair. Is this working?
Yes, it is.
Cool, great.
So hi, Brooklyn. How are things over there? How is your life going?
You know, a little bit weird. Streets are empty, long lines at the grocery store, but I've been trying to keep busy. Been making a lot of little arrangements for solo violin and multiple tracks of violins that are up on my YouTube channel and so forth. So trying to take my mind off things and spark some creative energy.
Yeah, no, that's awesome that you're finding these creative outlets. It doesn't surprise me, even though we have not yet had the chance to make music together. And of course, as I was just saying, I'm so disappointed in that. I have been following your career and your artistry for a few years for a few years now. Although we should say we do actually have one thing in common in our backgrounds.
Yeah, so I was a member of the San Francisco Symphony Youth Orchestra for many seasons. Actually, I think I joined probably a couple years after you left, unfortunately. So we never overlapped there, but I had heard about you. The legend continued in the YO.
Well, yes, we were unfortunately not, as you say, not meshing. Although I do remember the first time I heard you play, it was at a donor appreciation event at the San Francisco Symphony at the point where you were concertmaster of the youth orchestra. I believe you were 15. And it was the Saint-Saëns introduction and Rondo Capriccioso. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah.
But I remember thinking after two notes, it just took two notes for me to say, aha, okay, filing this away for future reference. So while I'm a little frustrated, of course, that I was hoping that that initial connection would come to fruition tonight, we're just going to have to take the old rain check. But I wanted to ask you about a couple of things, and just to give a little bit of context here, I want to use as our starting point the recital that you gave recently at the 92nd Street Y in New York in February, which I was privileged enough to attend. You played for about an hour and 20 minutes without effectively any break, just for solo violin, no accompaniment at all. A program that was based on individual movements selected from the partitas and sonatas for unaccompanied violin by Bach, interspersed with a wide range of repertoire from the 20th and 21st centuries. And I was struck by a number of things in that, not the least of which was, I think, the degree to which you exemplify a trend that I've noticed among young musicians, and that is an extraordinary ease and fluidity in a wide range of musical styles. You are, to my way of thinking, and enviably so, a real musical polyglot. And I'm wondering how you came to some of the touchstones along the way that made you comfortable to go from Bach to Enescu, back to Bach, to Steve Reich, to Kortak, to Sahario, all of this incredible musical journey that we went on that evening. What were some of the things that shaped your thinking along the way?
Well, I should say that probably the most important line of thought for me is that um, in crafting this program and also in sort of seeing music in general, you're looking at um, a chronology, and of course, Bach for many people, and of course at the beginning of solo violin writing, Bach is at the very beginning of that, and the tradition, as I see it, is incredibly fluid. So you can really trace Bach all the way to the current present day, and that's what I tried to do in this program. We had these three pillars. So in my thought, we had three pillars of these three major pieces: the Bach Chaconne to end the program. In the middle was the Steve Reich violin phase, which is a very substantial piece. And at the beginning, you had a piece by Du Yun, who's a contemporary composer, for a soundtrack of recorded monks, on top of which is a flowing improvisation. And these three pieces, to me, sort of they talk to each other. They have elements in common. There's a chaconne element, this sort of variations on a ground bass that I found. That was the first thing that I thought of when I heard each of those two pieces, and that is, of course, the foundation of what a chaconne is in definition. So, to me, the pieces, of course, on the surface level, they're incredibly different in style and incredibly different in approach and all of that, but they have the DNA of the pieces is somehow traditionally rooted in something. And for me, everything goes back to Bach, everything goes back to Baroque. And this is actually the recital that you're about to hear, um, explores a couple of pieces that are even in the generations before Bach, so written by Bieber, written by Vilsmeier. These were influences of Bach's and great violinists of their age. And the fact that the one thing that every single piece has in common on that program you mentioned is the fact that they were written for violin alone. And I think that um, that commonality is fascinating to me. How a composer could take one instrument, whether they're writing in 1650 or whether they're writing in 2020, and compose something for that exact same instrument to be played. And so I found, I continue to find similarities and commonality between so many of the pieces on that program. And it's so fun for me to program in that way, the sort of fluid flowing line of 100 minutes of music or so forth, nonstop. So I'm glad you enjoyed that.
Yeah, and one other thing that struck me is that what you mentioned so beautifully now was your thought processing in creating the program, and that in and of itself is amazing. But then it's another thing to be able to execute it in the way that you did, to be comfortable enough with the immense complexities of Steve Reich violin phase or the Du Yun piece, and to be able to bring it up so effortlessly at the same time and turning on a dime to go back to Bach and to be so thoroughly comfortable in that style as well, without seemingly any effort involved in crossing those centuries. And I guess my question is that your approach to Bach and clearly to Baroque music in general is informed by a particular stylistic framework. I guess sometimes people call it historically informed practice, period instrument practice, whatever. And that is not necessarily still a standard thing to come out of music conservatories. Is that a fair assessment? In other words, people are still taught to play Bach in, broadly speaking, a certain way with a certain use of vibrato and bow speed, or is that really a thing of the past now? And did you find you had lots of different influences along the way in your education?
You know, I've always been very attracted personally to that so-called historically informed playing style. Um, not insofar as I'm into the fact that that's how they did it back then, but it's because I think I really connect with the fact that more often than not, when you hear these players play Bach, you're hearing them breathe and you're hearing them sing and you're hearing all of these other influences. You're hearing such incredible variety of articulation and variety of density in the bow and this sort of way of speaking and singing and breathing that I find doesn't. I mean, it of course, it doesn't really happen in modern Bach playing or so-called Bach playing of you know of the 1950s, 1960s. You think of Heifetz playing Bach, and it has this incredible brilliance, an incredible command of the instrument, and yet it doesn't really have this dance-like feeling, this sort of like airy,
Hmm.
floating, also penetrative feeling. So for me, that's how I've approached it. Not so much as from consciously trying to really replicate what they were doing in the past, but really from the sense that this is a more holistic way of approaching things. And I think to go along with your question about how do I go through eras like that on a dime, I think the answer also lies in something similar, which is that I try to approach them with similarity. So I don't necessarily, I try to find a flow in between the pieces, and I try to find the similarities and find the crux of information that is similar. And of course, you take the composers as their own, but there's an incredible way to which um, so many of these pieces can talk to each other through time and space that I find fascinating.
So in a short while, we're going to experience the recital program that you put together, which, as we've mentioned, is basically focused on the Baroque. And most people think of the Baroque as, let's say, Handel, Bach, and Vivaldi, but that really is a culmination of a process that was set a good 100 years before that. That's what we call the High Baroque. So you are taking us back further into, as you say, the generation or two before Bach. I think, tell us a little bit about the bow that you're using, because alert viewers might notice that it's a little bit differently shaped. And if they're not familiar with that, what can you expect to hear? What does that?
Yeah.
What's all about?
Well, actually, I have it right here.
Do you?
I was
Excellent.
just practicing.
Do you have the modern bow as
Let me
well?
show you. I do, yeah. So let me show the modern bow first. So this is a modern bow. This is my bow, made in about 1850. Um, and so as you can see, it's a concave shape, right? So it goes like that, and that allows you to have balance at the tip as well as weight at the frog. So we call this the frog. Um, Contrary, this is the Baroque bow. So you see it's a convex shape. This is the tip, this is the frog. And it's shaped more like that. And what this gives you is less control, less weight at the frog. Less weight at the tip, but more variety, more possibility at the frog end of things where your hand is. So if you see, there's a lot of material and a lot of ways you can just shape and sculpt things right about here. So versus the modern bow is meant to be balanced all the way through. And so you can do things at the tip that you can generally also do at the frog. Um, and so in Baroque playing, this means that with the Baroque bow, it's somehow easier to play chords. It's easier to um, sustain notes that you would sing. Let's say you're singing a note. The beginning of your note is going to be with the most depth, and the end of the note is going to trail off. And that's basically following the exact shape of this bow. So larger plume at the beginning of the note, tapering off at the end of the note. And that's kind of, in very simple terms, the essence of Baroque playing. and
Does that
just music.
give you kind of you were referring to an airy quality earlier in your discussion? Is that what the bow can help you achieve, as opposed to, you were talking about the high fits approach, much more sustained intensity of line? Is
Yes.
that a distinction?
Yeah. So think about this as a brush stroke, and if this were a brush, the brush would taper out at the end. And the modern bow is designed to completely eliminate that. I mean, we still have less weight at the tip in the modern bow, but in general, it's designed to have this incredible sustain all the way through, and that you can create the longer line that really eliminates your the sound of the bow change at the tip. So um, yeah, that really that informs a lot of what you do in Baroque playing, and it's not required to have a bow like this, but I happen to have it, and I'm enjoying playing it, which is not something that I normally get to do in daily life. So
I'm getting the ideas, which is speaking off the top of my head, that we might have an entire separate discussion, you and I, in the future, that you can really drill deep into that, because I think it's a fascinating topic that you're bringing up. And maybe, like, as Exhibit A, Your Honor, we can present the thing that you prepared for us, these two Baroque pieces, plus a little bonbon at the end for something different.
yeah, absolutely. So the two pieces that I prepared are both being played on the Baroque bow, so you'll see that in action. And then the last little 2-minute ditty is with the modern bow. So you'll see if you can tell the difference. But and then I'll talk through all of those. So I really hope you enjoy that segment.
Yeah, well, that seems like the perfect segue for us to move on to. So I want to thank you so much, Alexi, for being with us here this evening. And as it were, now I'll turn it over to you and your pre-recorded segment, and hope that everybody enjoys it. Thanks so much for being with us this evening, and talk to you soon.
Thank you.